Thank you very much. My name is Jessica Brown. I am a marketing manager here at Communispond, and I will be your host today. If you're listening through your computer speakers, there may be some audio inconsistency. Unfortunately, that is beyond our control, but if you'd like, you can at any time call in using the number that's in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. We are recording today's session, so a few hours after the webinar, you will get an email with a link to the recording and the slides. We are very interested in taking your questions, and if you notice the chat box underneath me, just click on Private, and then Leaders and Assistants, and type your question. We'll answer as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. Also, if your Start tab is open on your screen, to the right of that tab, you can see the Slides tab. Please select that tab, and that will display the slides for the webinar. So let's get started. So finally, at the end of today's session, we'll be drawing names for our prizes. We'll be giving away an Android tablet, as well as 2 gift certificates, good for Communispond's public seminars of executive presentation skills. The gift certificate can also be used as a $1,550 credit towards a corporate program. For those of you who are new to Communispond, Communispond has been the leader in business communication skills for over 46 years. We are a business communication skills leader, and our programs include Socratic selling, persuasive dialogue, and business writing, to name a few. And of course, we have a unique expertise in presentation skills training with our flagship course, Executive Presentation Skills. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Wayne Turmel. Wayne is the president of our strategic partner, GreatWebMeetings.com, a longtime Communispond faculty member, and an expert in communication and presentation skills, particularly as they apply to the online world. He's the author of several books on the subject, including 10 Steps to Successful Virtual Presentations and Meet Like You Mean It, which we will be giving away a copy of at the end of the webinar. Especially appropriate for our purposes today, Wayne is the writer of the very popular blog, theconnectedmanager.com. Wayne, I will now turn the podium over to you.
Well, thanks, Jessica. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome from Chicago. Lovely to be here. Before we get into our topic, just a word about what's kind of going to happen today. We are going to be polling you throughout the program, so this isn't one of your put the phone on mute and go answer your email kind of deals. We really do appreciate your input. And the first thing that we would like to ask you is, what brought you here today? Is it because you're frustrated because the emails you receive are perhaps not what they should be? Is it that the emails you send need improvement? Maybe it's the written documents throughout your organization aren't as effective as they should be. You just wanted some general information, or somebody up the food chain in the organization thought it was perhaps important. I'll give you just a moment to please respond. Click on the answer that you find most appropriate. We'll give you just another moment. And in the meantime, remind you that we really do want your questions. So don't be afraid to get them in queue, and the earlier you get them in, the more you'll make sure it gets handled. So let's share the results really quickly, and this isn't terribly surprising. A lot of people are looking for, frankly, more general information about writing. It's becoming more and more an important part of our day. Most of you think that your emails are okay. The problem is everybody else, and I think that's not the most unusual situation. That's really good information, though. The fact is that people's interest in business writing is higher than perhaps it's ever been, and there's a lot of good reasons for this. So let's get into what we're going to talk about today. We are going to talk about why writing is different from other forms of communication, and don't say because it's written, because that's just kind of cheesy and annoying. More importantly, how technology has changed business writing, maybe more in the last 5 to 10 years than at any point in human history. We're going to discuss the personal as well as the business dangers of poor writing in the workplace. We're going to identify maybe the most common pitfalls or problems that we run into. And then finally, we're going to give you 5 steps, 5 factors that go into good business writing. So that's where we're going today in our time. We will give you some great information. Hopefully you will ask lots of good questions and leave here with not only some good information, but some best practices and some ideas that you can implement immediately. All right. So we were talking about the characteristics of writing, and the first thing, what makes writing different, is that it's essentially one-way communication. When we write documents, emails, texts, status updates, tweets, however you correspond with the outside world, information goes out, and it's essentially one way. And the reason is that we don't get any immediate visual vocal response cues. Writing lacks you're essentially communicating in a vacuum. If we're all in the same room and I say something, I can see that one person is kind of nodding, one person is looking confused, so I can stop, I can adjust my message, I can check for understanding. In writing, that isn't really the case. Live, you can see body language and tone of voice. It gives you cues to how your message is being responded to. But without that feedback, you can't adjust your message as you can in real time. So when you write, it's really critical that you get your message and the tone correct the very first time, because you won't be there to see or hear the response until perhaps it's just too darn late. And then finally, written communication happens over time and distance. Conversations, or whether we're on the phone or we're live, they tend to happen in real time. We're getting a little closer with instant messaging. We are at least in a synchronous kind of world, but you still don't have the ease of simultaneous conversation that allows for informality, joking, questioning, clarification, taking the message back and taking another run at it that you get. So the fact that it's one way, we're not getting the cues, and it happens over time and distance, makes writing a challenge anyway. Now we're going to add to that the complicating factor of technology. Today's business writing is essentially permanent. Emails, blogs, tweets, things that you write that go up on SharePoint or the shared file somewhere actually can exist indefinitely. I mean, once upon a time, we wrote a document, there was an original, there was the copy that you sent to somebody else, there was a very defined number of hard copies. That's not the case anymore. And what happens is that because of the ease of transmission, email, file transfer, going online and finding things, your message could be read by any number of unplanned readers. It's so easy to pass things along, even long after the original message was written, and you can just ask any number of disgraced politicians out there how that feels. Finally, the speed of delivery makes writing very different than it's ever been before. Delivery is instantaneous, which has led to what I call the hit-send syndrome. It's as if we think that emailing or texting is a conversation, so we dash off our emails or our texts or our answers to questions without really thinking what we've done, because we can always correct it, and in fact, we can't. This assumption is what often causes problems, and if, of course, you've ever spent 3 days apologizing for a document it took 30 seconds to send, you understand what some of the challenges in our world are. The way that we write is very different. Writing used to be the domain of a very select few people. I've written a number of books. I write blog posts. I've written both fiction and nonfiction. So I'm one of those people for whom writing has always been important. But in school, most of us learn to write either creatively or for documentation. We haven't learned to write as a form of business communication. We wrote books and essays and college papers and whatever else we did. And I would venture to guess that most of us didn't like it particularly, and we never really thought we'd need it in the real world. And up until 20 or 25 years ago, that worked for us, because when we got into the work world, we didn't actually have to do much writing. Before the invention of the telephone, you either did business face-to-face or there was writing, but it was done by professionals, by clerks and scribes and people who specialized in writing, and the rest of us just kind of went about our business. Then the telephone came in, and most of our business was conducted verbally over the telephone, and what wasn't was, again, still done by professionals. My mother's job for most of her life as a secretary was cleaning up her boss's scribbles, turning it into readable documents. Salespeople certainly weren't responsible for their own documentations. And if you rose high enough in the company, even with the introduction of email, you still had an admin who did most of that stuff for you. But today, and email really ushered this in, we're all business writers. I remember when I started in the business world, email was just coming in. Salespeople didn't write their own letters to customers. It went through an admin assistant or a process. Now, we just write and hit send. We're doing more communication in writing than at any time in human history. And think about that for a moment, because think about the training and the education you've gotten. Does that bear up to the fact that this has really changed the ground on which we work? And because of technology, the rise of the personal computer and tablets and smartphones and broadband absolutely everywhere, more and more transactions are occurring via written communication, and this has really fundamentally changed the environment and raised the stakes with which we work. Now, let's stop for a moment. We're going to go back to the poll, so stop answering your email, come back to us, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The first question I'm going to ask you, which is, how many business emails do you send during a day? Fewer than 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, more than 30. Just go ahead and hit the appropriate response, if you would, please. Very quickly, we want to not spend a lot of time on this, but I think it's very instructive. This and the next question really frame our conversation today. All right, so let's take a look, and you'll see that none of us are sending fewer than 10. A few of you are keeping it to the 10 to 20 range, but about half are sending more than 20 emails a day. And I'm willing to bet, particularly those of us who are managers, we probably receive twice as many emails as we send, because we're copied on things and things like that. So let's withdraw that question and ask you the next one, which is, how many business phone calls do you make in a day? Fewer than 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, or more than that? And we'll give you just a moment to do that. And remind you that we do, in fact, want to get some questions in queue. We've already got one or two. That's great. I love that. And so in the meantime, let's share the results. And good heavens, so most of us make fewer than 10 phone calls a day, and yet we're getting more than 30 emails. So think about the balance of communication, and what have we been prepared to do? We've been trained all our life to talk, but writing is something that we've just kind of been expected to know how to do, and it's probably no big surprise. All right, so telecommuting is making this different. What makes telecommuting possible? Technology. And of course, the more emails we send, the more emails it generates. So now we have literally billions of emails a day flying about in the world. It's this giant self-feeding cycle. And that's great. I mean, it has really allowed us, I have been able to conduct business with people on the other side of the world without ever actually physically meeting them. But there are some risks. There are personal risks as well as risks for the larger organization as a whole. So since most of us are interested kind of in writing in general, let's start with the personal exposure and the risks that it creates for us, and then we'll take a look at it on an organizational level. So there are a number of things ranging from how well you communicate to the lack of privacy. Let's start with how well you communicate. Are you clear and concise, or do you ramble? Think about it. Your individual communication style and reputation is at risk every time you document something in writing. These skills are more visible, as we've said, than they have ever been, and they display more than just our ability to spell accurately. And it actually creates an impression in the mind of the reader that is very difficult to overcome. It exposes how you think and organize information. Are you logical and well organized? Do you have a command of your facts? Can you communicate in a way that is clear and easily understood? And that includes little things like, can you control your emotions, and does the tone seem appropriate to the business environment? We've all heard about careers that have come to a screeching halt because of a disastrous email, you know, the Jerry Maguire moment that somebody has. Business email is not the place for uncontrolled venting, even between people that we trust, because remember, the chance for unintended readers is so much higher. And you also need to remember that business email lives forever. Just because the person you sent it to deletes it doesn't mean it's gone. And that creates something really interesting. When we had, you know, a limited number of copies, privacy was fairly easy to maintain. But for corporate email systems, for example, your emails don't belong to you. They belong to the company. Anything that passes through that server is, in fact, their property. And they can sit on that forever. And in the case of communication with the government, for example, your emails may become part of the domain. If your employer pays for your smartphone, every text, every chat, every email that's sent on that phone, including photos, can be retrieved, and if there was a sudden intake of breath there, we've probably all been guilty of forgetting that little fact from one time to another. There are, in fact, keylog apps that if you're using a company laptop, they can actually trace what your activity is. GPS software can tell you, your boss, where you are at any given time. The fact is that the issue of privacy is extremely complex, and I certainly don't, and Communispond does not claim to be a lawyer. But the best thing that you can do is assume that there is no privacy on company systems and act accordingly. If you have specific questions, contact your company attorney, your general counsel, because I think these things are really critical. Now, that's as a human being. So just as when we walk to the front of the room, people make judgments about us as presenters, workers, our credibility, all of that stuff, there is also organizational exposure. If you wonder why the company cares so much about what gets sent under their name, it's because you are an agent of the company, and everything that you do and say that stems in a work environment and outside of it reflects on the company. And there are things that they need to think about, not only company reputation, but intellectual property, trade secrets, human resource information that is absolutely critical to the organization, and because of the ease of transmission and all of that, is almost impossible to control. You need to know what content can and cannot be shared. If the organization has not already given you explicit guidelines, and those guidelines need to be explicit. If you assume that people will behave properly, I would submit you've not met many people. The permanence of electronic communication is, again, something that has really changed, and the delete key doesn't remove things permanently. There have been a number of lawsuits in which emails that everybody thought were long gone are now being dredged up as evidence. And things change over time. If you look at what's going on with Hillary Clinton and her emails, despite where you sit on the spectrum, there are some interesting challenges where things that were not classified at one period of time suddenly are, and now that creates all kinds of problems, legal and otherwise. The fact of the matter is, on a daily basis, how communications from employees go out into the world represent the company. Your company email address and logo are part of your business emails, and that makes you an official agent of the company. If your emails are unclear, rambling, they contain grammatical and spelling mistakes, the receiver may make assumptions not only about you, but about your company, that you do business in a sloppy manner or that you're unprofessional. If you're a manager, do you know what's going out from your team? It's incumbent on you to know whether your direct reports emails represent the company well, and if not, are you doing something about it? Are you coaching? Are you helping people do better? The fact of the matter is that business writing is a performance issue, and it needs to be coached and trained just like any other performance issue. So what are some of the common pitfalls? When we look at what people are saying about business writing in general, there are a number of challenges. Time is limited. Are we getting to the point immediately? No one wants to read an email and then try to figure out what the heck was that person saying. You need to get the immediate attention of your readers, or your emails get left in the inbox or deleted. And the fact of the matter is that most people do not read to the end of emails. We look in the preview pane, we see, does this apply to me, does it not, is there action required or is there not, and we delay it, delete it, or move it for later based on that, even though there may be critical information in the body of the email. So the longer we take to answer the question, why are you sending this, what is this about, the more it's going to bite you. Length of emails and all written documents are a challenge. It's funny, years ago when Communispond started teaching business writing, particularly around email, the challenge was that people were writing an email like they always wrote letters. There was, to whom it may concern in response to your email of the whatever, a lot of very florid kind of language. And now it's very often the other way around. And so the email itself is very short, but it may have a thread with 20 emails attached to it. Either way, you need to get the right amount of detail in order to achieve your stated purpose. And unfortunately, many of us like to over-explain, and as a result, our readers might tune out. Now, over the last year or two, the complaint that we are hearing the most is inappropriate style. People are writing too short, which sounds rude. They are being too informal, which sounds unprofessional. And when we talk about style, that can seem very kind of esoteric, but really it's this. Style is the feeling that your writing causes in your readers. So whether you know it or not, you have a writing style, and if you don't choose that style on purpose, it's going to come out of what you do, and you may be causing reactions that you frankly don't want. Are you overly blunt? Are you afraid to get to the point, and so you over-explain and beat around the bush? Do you sound pushy or patronizing? You can, in fact, develop a business-neutral style, and you can learn to adapt your style to particular readers. The first step, though, is being aware that how you write has an impact beyond the simple transfer of data. All right, so why does miscommunication occur? I want to kind of stress something, and this makes a lot of us crazy, but it is the sender of the communication who bears most of the responsibility for whether or not it's understood. It might not be fair, but it's true. I've always called it the 51% rule. The ideas in your head are not clear to someone else unless you make them clear. When you put your thoughts in writing, we know what we mean. But does the reader? Are we making assumptions and all of that? And the biggest problem, as I mentioned earlier, is unlike if we're speaking and I can see the horrified look on your face and I go, what's wrong? Is something, did you misunderstand? Did I not explain something well? In writing, you can't do that. You may not know you've been misunderstood until way down the line and something semi-disastrous happens. One other point about miscommunication. In today's global environment, we're often communicating with people who don't share a same first language as we do. And so things like jokes, colloquialism, the way we phrase things, style really does vary wildly from culture to culture, language to language. And so it's very important that before we send anything, whether it's a full-blown report or a simple instant message, that we think very long and hard about who our reader is. That's really critical. We need to remember that most of the problems with email, for all the grief that email takes as an ineffective tool, almost all of those problems sit between the keyboard and the chair. People are responsible for most of those problems. Business writing is a process, just like all forms of communication. And so we need to look at what is the process so we can identify how do we improve it, right? So we promised you to take a look at 5 factors. And the first one kind of builds on what I just said a moment ago, which is that we as the writer are responsible for getting the message across. So we need to think about not only our primary reader, who is the person or the intended audience for this document, but who else might read it. And we need to think about those unplanned readers. That will help you decide what to put in and what to leave out of any particular message or document that you're writing. You need to define your purpose. Know why you're writing and stick to that. One reason that documents, particularly reports, tend to ramble is that we put in every piece of extraneous information we can think of as an attempt to cover our bases. And in fact, that muddies your reading and makes it harder for the reader to really understand your core message. How you organize your message needs to be defined by what is the purpose, right? Are we simply giving you information? Are we giving you information because we're trying to influence an outcome, trying to persuade you to take action? We need to be very clear. In the case of emails, simple things like the subject line can dictate whether people really understand what to expect when they read your document. When an email has a subject line that has nothing to do with the contents, there's a really good chance that you aren't going to achieve your purpose. All right. So this one, and of course, you know, there's much to be said, and I hope we get lots of questions so we can get down in the weeds on this. You need to organize your information for the reader. Structure and sequence your message based on who your reader is and what they need to know. You need to be clear and concise. You don't want to bury the message by throwing in extra details that maybe make you look like you've done your research or make you look more credible in your eyes, but actually muddy the waters. And a really simple example of this is, do you create your email inductively or deductively? A deductive email kind of starts at point A and builds the case to point B, and that's for those of us that do research and analyze information and report out, is very often how we come to our conclusions, but the reader is in a hurry, and they may want to know, what's your point? Why do you say that? They maybe want a more inductive approach. We all know the higher you are on the food chain, the less you will actually read of any document. That's why the executive summary is called the executive summary, because the rest of us have to work our way through the documents while the boss looks at the executive summary and very often makes their decision based off of that. So your information needs to be organized. That includes not only how much information you put, where you put the information, but what it looks like. Is it organized on the page? White space, bullet points, is it easy to pick out information? You need to use the appropriate style and tone, and appropriate style and tone is defined by what you're trying to achieve and who's reading it. Recognize that, when your mother said it's not what you said, it's how you said it, that applies to your writing as well. And I've certainly over the years developed some calluses on my soul as a result of learning some lessons the hard way. If your message leaves the wrong impression or feeling, you are in fact miscommunicating, whether your facts are right or not. So if you are sending an email to the CEO with a little smiley face, the CEO may make some assumptions about your professionalism or your maturity or whatever, which may or may not be accurate. Do you create, or are you assuming relationships that don't really exist? That's where a lot of the disconnect happens. I can't say this enough, and having said this, I will also tell you that I am as guilty of this as everybody else, which is speed of delivery very often has us thinking that we need to respond as quickly as humanly possible, and we don't edit and proof everything, and we really need to. Never send or post any written document, and that includes emails, tweets, IMs, but also larger documents. Never send them without reviewing it, and if it's important enough, get a neutral set of eyes to take a look at it. Think about what you're trying to achieve. Put yourself in the reader's position. If you were reading this for the first time, would you understand what's going on? You can't take it back once it's been written. You want to consider the personal exposure. Maybe you need to err on the side of formality with this one. And also the business exposure. Is there something in here that, regardless of what you think about, I don't care what people think about me, but it is going to matter what they think about the organization. You need to consider both. So you really want to make sure that you don't hit send until you're really satisfied and confident that both the content and the style are going to reflect well on you. Okay, so that's nice, Wayne. What does that mean? Well, there are three things that I'd like you to consider, and I know that we're already getting some questions in queue, so we'll be able to go down into this on a little bit more detail. First, you have to be willing to take a look at your own written communication. Honestly, how do you evaluate your skills? Are you concise? Have you stopped and taken a look at the tone? Things like the use of pronouns, for example, greatly affect tone. The more pronouns you use, the more personal and intimate the writing seems. The more you use we as an organization, the company says, the more formal it's going to be. Either might be appropriate given what it is you're trying to do. But do you need to take more time and proof your communication before you send it out into the world? Are you willing to offer feedback to others? And this is very tricky. we're not, because most of us are not really comfortable with our own writing skills, particularly business writing, we are very reluctant to offer feedback to others. And it can be peer-to-peer feedback. You know, Jessica, you sent that email out the other day. I'm wondering if you thought about this, or, boy, maybe it came across as harsher than you meant. That kind of peer-to-peer feedback is actually very useful. If you're a manager, you actually have the responsibility, and you know, you're going to take final responsibility for what goes out when your people communicate. So are you coaching? Are you taking a look at those emails you're CC'd on and offering feedback and offering suggestions and helping people get better? And that's critical, because this is such an important part of people's work now that it should be part of the performance management system. How they write is critical to how they work, and therefore a lot of that falls on us. And if you're responsible for the organization's performance review process, offering training, things like that, are people getting the assistance they need? Because does your policy have a explicit set of rules around communication? Do people in the company know what they are? There may be policies sitting in a manual somewhere, but you know, these also can extend to things like what you can post on your Facebook page, what is fair comment outside the workplace. You know, if your company doesn't have policies about this, you're kind of at the mercy of people's best judgment. And again, without being cynical, I suspect you might have more faith in your fellow human than I do. You don't want to deal with this after a bad situation has occurred. So if your organization does not have explicit policies in place, posted where people can have access to them, you'd best get on it before something bad happens. To wrap up, and then we'll go to our questions, Jessica, written business communication is anything from a 200-page report to a tweet on the company account. We all need to consider the ways in which we communicate, how that reflects on us as individuals, how it reflects on the organization, and ultimately whether or not it will help us achieve what we want to achieve or get in the way. And Jessica, I know that we have a program designed to help folks actually deal with this. Whoops, Jessica, we're not hearing you.
Oh, I am sorry, Wayne. I'm talking to myself over here on mute. Thank you. So, yes, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about this course before we get to our questions. Right up front is a one-day session designed to help people incorporate the 5 steps that Wayne just outlined into their writing. And it has a particular emphasis on emails, and there's a lot of practice and feedback during the session. And we also have an online self-study version of Right Up Front, and that only takes about 3 hours of seat time. And at a number of points throughout the program, the students email writing samples to one of our mentors, and they will actually give individualized feedback. So without further ado, let's get to some of these questions that came in. Jump to that first question that came in. So chat and like on your computer and also texting seems to be pretty informal, so that's something that needs to be especially taken into consideration in a business setting.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think that chat and text, by their definition, because we tend to send shorter messages, because they are sent in real time and kind of mimic conversation, there is an informality there. And to my mind, there actually should be, because that's one of the ways in which we learn about each other. You know, we learn each other's personal style. You put in a little smiley face or an emoji or something, and I kind of learn that, Jessica's a little bit of a smart aleck, and so that's fine. The nature of chat and text are informal, but that doesn't mean that they can or should be unprofessional. And again, because those tend to be one-on-one communications, if you are receiving texts or chats which are, and I'm going to use the word inappropriate, which makes it sound like they're worse than they are, but if the tone is not correct or something isn't right, we need to be willing to step up to the writer and say, hey, are you sure you meant that? But the informality, and with the age of people coming into the workplace now, those darn kids with their chat and their emojis, they are very proficient with the technology, but may need to be shown the ropes and the guidelines around what's appropriate and not in the workplace. So I think that chat and IM, by definition, will be less formal. Professionalism is still an important component of that.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. Another question that came in, how do you get colleagues and leaders to understand that they may have a writing problem as it relates to emails?
Yeah, how do you say to somebody, boy, that was really awful? It's a challenge, and I think it depends on what your relationship is. Peer-to-peer is maybe the most powerful way of addressing this, because I might find it easier to say, Jessica, I was reading that, and this is the impression I took away. Is that what you meant? And it seems less like a reprimand or less like you're getting in trouble. And if your team has the kind of collegial environment where people are comfortable and confident giving each other feedback, obviously that's ideal. I think that when you offer the feedback, it's very easy to say, as a reader, this is what I read. Is that what you meant? And when the person says, no, of course not, that's not what I meant, well, then you can have the conversation around, well, how do we do that? With the leaders, of course, anytime you're giving feedback up the organization, it's tricky. And I hate to say it depends, but it does depend on your relationship with the person. Again, feedback on behavior, feedback on actions is usually appreciated. When you're talking about tone, it can be very tricky because it sounds like you're attacking that person personally. Again, the feedback should be based on, as a reader, this is what I saw. Or, some people were concerned about this. That might be something we want to address. If you can keep the feedback based on the non-personal, it's generally appreciated. If the CEO is sending out junk, that's a little bit harder to deal with, but it's highly unlikely that it's complete junk. So feedback should be based on what you perceived and what you actually saw. Not, boy, the tone of that was really harsh. When you said this, it came across as that. And that, of course, is coaching and feedback 101, right?
Perfect. Thanks, Wayne. Next question, I'll actually roll two questions together that are fairly similar. Is there danger in editing out some of the emails that are in a chain that you may be forwarding? And the other question pertains to changing the subject line when you reply or forward. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so email threads are my personal mission in life. I think that I understand why they occur. People want to be able to reference earlier documents in order to support their argument or provide context. The problem is not with the email threads. The problem is with how we read them. So there are two things that you said there which need to be addressed. The first is you don't want to leave out important information. Well, to be honest, my preference is that you take the extra 20 seconds, and that's what it takes, find the information you're referring to, and cut and paste it, just cut, paste, into the new email where it's more likely that people will find it and read it. So it's okay to reference earlier emails. Hey, in the in the email on January 17th, you told me this. Boom. And that, I think, makes a really big difference. In terms of subject lines, I think subject lines need to change. I think if what is being discussed at that moment is different than what the email thread says, you are very likely to create miscommunication. You don't put something really critical in an email that says, thank you. That's just common sense. People need to know, first of all, what is this email about? The subject line is the first thing that tells them what it's about. Secondly, they will read in depth if there's a good reason to, but remember, they're scanning the very beginning of the email, and the more work you make your reader do, the less likely you're going to be successful. And I wish that wasn't the case. It may not be right or in a just universe the way it would work, but it's the way it works, and we know because we do it when we read our email. So just because we wrote it doesn't mean people are going to treat it any differently than we treat everything that comes our way.
Great. Thank you, Wayne. And I think we have time for one more question. When is it appropriate to have written transactions versus verbal transactions?
Yeah, this can be read a couple of different ways. We've talked about in the past the notion that you want your communication, depending on the stakes of the communication and the circumstances, to be as rich as possible. And so, one-on-one meeting over a cup of coffee is a much richer, better way, if you will, of communicating than just an email exchange. So we have to make a decision. My personal thing is that if the way that we're doing it isn't working, we need to do something different. So if I have an email exchange with somebody and it goes back 2 or 3 times and it's very obvious that there's a misunderstanding or we're not getting any closer to resolution, pick up the phone, because you are much more likely to achieve resolution. Yes, we're all busy. Yes, we all have our preferred style. Maybe there are 20 things Jessica would rather do today than talk to Wayne. By the way, it's entirely likely that Jessica has 20 or more things she would rather do than talk to Wayne on any given day. But to solve this problem, to make this happen, to get the work done and move on, she's got to suck it up and pick up the phone and talk to me, because otherwise we're going to continue to torture each other. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Is the way that you're currently handling it the best way to communicate? And if it's not, try something different. I have a 3-email rule. Anytime 3 emails go back and forth and you haven't reached resolution, something isn't working, pick up the phone or get on the webcam or do something.
Thank you very much.
And it may be, by the way, Jessica, it may be that because we are more used to speaking, we are generally more eloquent speaking than we are writing, because we've had more practice talking than writing. That may ultimately be the best way to communicate your message.
Perfect. All right. With that being said, just want to remind everyone I will be emailing the winners of the 1 free Android tablet and the 2 free executive presentation skills gift certificates after the conclusion of the webinar. And Wayne will be reaching out to the winner of the free Meet Like You Mean It. And that concludes our webinar. I want to thank Wayne Turmel for giving us some very valuable insights, and thank you all for joining us. I hope to see you at our next webinar.
Thank you for your participation. That does